Annie and I are going to be presenting a very condensed version of the pathway that we led last year. And by last year, I mean the 2023-2024 school year. Hey, there we are. Where we started at the Advanced Coaching Network in Traverse City. We did 3 days of breakout sessions there with the same group. And then we continued doing breakouts during each quarterly meeting for the following year. So we had one very large group. It was probably 80 or 90 people or something that we worked with. But it was 10 hours of total time with them over a year. So we've condensed it into 90 minutes for you. And we've tried to really look back across everything that we talked about and find the things that seem to be the most helpful resources and the most helpful conversations to share with you today and to take back to your districts in this work. Do any of these jump out? What do you relate most closely to? Not being included in curriculum decision-making processes, trying to select a high-quality rubric to evaluate a curriculum, implementation or de-implementation problems. Okay, I see a lot of nodding for de-implementation. Ensuring equity and culturally responsiveness in your materials. Yep, a lot of nods. Okay, nods on to a lot of things. Getting teachers on board or bought in. Okay, the idea of the perfect curriculum, that's one of our thinking traps, right? Like the idea that if we just find the right thing, all our other problems will go away. Misalignment, materials that you have that don't well align with the literacy essentials or what we know from the research, or other. All right, I saw a lot of nodding around de-implementation. Implementation and de-implementation. Anybody want to give us an example of something that you're trying to de-implement? Yeah.
Well, I'm going through a curriculum review with a district right now, and they don't have a common curriculum. So that's going to be our biggest challenge. And when we come in and say everybody now needs to do this one same thing, they are very used to being able to do what they want to do. So we're not there yet, but I know that will be our biggest problem.
Yes, so I'm going to be telling the story of my son's district, East Lansing Public Schools, and our curriculum journey. I got to be on the curriculum selection committee as the parent, which was a really fun experience for me. But that was that we were in the same situation. There had not been one resource that everybody was using. And so bringing in a really high quality resource seems like a positive change, but it's not that easy because everybody's gotten very attached to what they're already doing. Anybody else have an implementation, de-implementation challenge that they want to share? We have something, yeah.
I think with implementation, something that I'm hearing a lot in the districts I cover 3 different districts, is training, access to training, as well as teachers wanting like instructional rounds of teachers who do it at a high quality, but not having, the time, the space, not wanting to take their prep time, so that's been a huge issue. Teachers are desiring that, but that's not always being implemented in the way that they need at the time they need it.
That makes a lot of sense. So we have some results from the poll now, is that right? Or some responses in the poll that you wanted to share?
Responses I can share. One response we got from the poll is that everyone wants the perfect curricular resource. Another, Jolyn says, my problem right now is knowing how to guide schools that don't know if what they're using will be on the approved list. Sue Elmer says implementation, teachers like doing their own thing, which may or may not be aligned with the best practices. They feel they know what's best.
Okay, so we're all living through a little bit of the pains of things that can be a, quote, problem. So we're hoping that we'll move a little bit asset-based, so we'll share some possible solutions or way to engage people in that as we go through the day and be able to just show you some tools to evaluate. Laura's going to be going over some research-proven tools and rubrics with us and just give you some opportunities to reflect and share, in which we made a note taker for you. So if you want to download that, it'll force you to make a a copy, and then you can put down any of your notes. If that's helpful, as we're going through, it will, but this is also linked. This should be linked in the, we put it in the pathway planning, so hopefully you all have access to that, and you can get it through that link as well.
Yeah, and you'll notice that on the note taker, the guiding question is really trying to get you to focus. We only have a short time, so really focusing in on the greatest curricular resource problem that you feel like you're facing right now. Everybody has a lot of problems, but what's the biggest challenge that you feel like you're dealing with right now? Oh, and we have more resources. We have a handout with lots and lots of resources. Everything we're going to talk about today is linked in this handout through the QR code. Right?
And the note takers in that.
Okay, great. But before we get started, I also just want to say I'm going to be talking a little bit about my own experience. Annie's going to be talking about her experience. We're going to bring in our experiences working with districts going through this process. But I actually want to skip to the end and just say that it's worth it. Because I mentioned before that I have a 5-year-old and a 10-year-old, both boys, very similar behavioral, cognitive, everything else, went to the same preschool, grew up in the same house. My oldest was in kindergarten when COVID happened and everything got shut down. But that happened in March, and before March, not much had happened with his literacy instruction. Really, he came into kindergarten knowing all his letters and sounds, and he went to virtual kindergarten knowing all his letters and sounds. Nothing had changed really for him. And because of COVID and everything else, it took him, a whole additional year to really start reading after that. And this is with me at home with him, and his father, who's a former teacher also. It was a lot. It was a big challenge for him to kind of waste that instructional time in kindergarten. Not waste, he had a great time, but you know what I mean. He had a great year, but and then also to have to transition to online, not having reading as a skill in place. So that's something we have to keep in mind when we think about all these 4th and 5th graders who had that experience. Since then, and this was in our pre-curricular days when everyone was kind of doing their own thing. Since then, I served on the curriculum committee. We selected a program that I really like for various reasons, but is not perfect. I helped the district implement that. I worked with the teachers to get over some of the roadblocks. And now I have a kindergartner who started reading in October. It's just a totally night and day experience of what a very good teacher is able to do with a supportive curriculum and enough time to really wrap her head around it, as opposed to having nothing and having to make up your own curriculum. So I really see this as something that is supportive of teachers and children and worth going through the headaches and pain of really finding something that's going to work for your district. So, and a lot of you are going through these headaches and pain, right? We are here because as a result of the Read by Grade 3 law and Science of Reading and pandemic recovery and all the money that's sloshing around because of all of these various overlapping reading crises, people are choosing new curriculum. They're trying to choose better curriculum, and they have the funding sources available to do that. But even if they're not adopting new things, many people are still trying to figure out how to use what they already have or what they have already adopted to meet the needs of their students now. And there's a lot of resistance. Teachers often have resistance to new things because of bad previous experiences. Everybody being taught, for example, everyone being taught to teach Reading Street with fidelity and to be on a certain page every day. And then a few years later, to be told, and we're not really using Reading Street anymore. You can kind of do what you want, right? And so having gone through that cycle a few times creates a lot of resistance to new things. So we want to start, of course, always by thinking about how we're grounding in the essentials. Annie, did you want to talk about our essentials connections here? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thanks for online friends. Teddy's putting the curricular resources page in the chat for you, so hopefully you'll have access to that. So when we think about robust resources, when we did the rewrite for the not the rewrite, but the updates to the K-3 essentials, one of the things we wanted to make sure is that people did not think the essentials are a curriculum, but we were really resolute in saying you do need to have a curriculum. So though the essentials are not, you need to have one, and the essentials are what you can layer over your curriculum to do a compare contrast and see if they're aligned or not with the research. So just wanted to reinforce that. And then we think about Dr. Duke, one of the quotes she said this morning, she said it's powerful to investigate what teachers believe is working. Well, I guess I made a typo because I was doing it fast, but basically asking teachers, what do they think is working, right? And really trying to be alongside them, because that may help solve some of the resistance, maybe, finding out what they think is working because they're so like, I need to use this curriculum. But then thinking about the knowledge building curriculum piece that she said, that there's just some anecdotal research on that and then some solid research on Corey. Oh wait, here's our little clicker thing. And we think about enabling conditions, right? Making sure that whatever we're doing, we're trying to make sure children are represented, families are represented. If we can bring in connections to families, to the curriculum, and to the content that we're learning, and have guest speakers or have opportunities to learn about other cultures in our room, that's all part of the essentials. Also thinking about what Dr. Clark said this morning about having belief in students and teachers. And also she talked about dispositions, without saying the word dispositions, but your coaching dispositions and whether or not you believe in teachers, that's part of our coaching practices, right? Is that you want to build rapport. Teachers need to know that you do believe in them. And then we're always helping them embed literacy throughout the day, which also leads into the enabling conditions that are part of the school-wide, center-wide. So not only is it important in literacy, but in math and in all of the organizations. So just trying to connect across the different essentials. And then coming back to the importance of motivation and engagement, which was actually covered across every single person that presented this morning, of like, how are we finding out how to really engage kids, finding out what they're interested in, saying, I believe in you, giving them opportunities to be in concert with other kids and leveraging what they know, like, making that connection from the new to the known, like what do they already know, helping them make those connections. So if you have a chance to revisit what Dr. Duke said, I think it's very, it resonates a lot with what the things that we'll say too. So, the last thing I'm going to say is when we first had the essentials, we used the practice guides that Dr. Tortorelli talked about. We had from MDE how to plan differentiated reading instruction, and we have done the updates to the essentials all along. That sheet you see at the bottom, that's in the facilitator guides. That was part of my job, was to create engagement activities with the modules. And so for every module, there's a guide that says, here's the bullet from the essentials. How well do I align with that? What should I adapt? What should I abandon that wouldn't align with that? So those are available to you in the facilitator guides for every single module, and each one is adapted for each module. So if it's Essential 5, the bullet points are for Essential 5, so you can walk through that with your team and your staff. And those are already made for you, and if you don't know how to access them, let me know. As we moved into the K2 version, on the second updated version, we were still doing all the things, but we realized what we were saying in our meetings, not everybody knew, and that's where we had to make it more transparent about like what we do believe about making sure we're culture responsive, engaging with all students. And so we had work by Dr. Muhammad that was infused, and through the diverse text set, we also brought in other people like Dr. Lindsay with some book studies. So we continue to try and make sure that we're aligning across wrapping around the whole child, and in the active view of reading, all grounded in the science of reading. Okay. Oh yeah, here's our poll.
Okay, and so for our next poll and table talk, we're thinking about the thinking traps that we're encountering related to curricular resources. So here are the choices. We just need to find that perfect curriculum, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't have to read them to you, but go ahead and look at this list and talk in your tables or respond to the poll about thinking traps you've encountered around the curricular resources.
I, in the past, have believed about half or more of these, or see people or work with people who fall into these thinking traps, especially the idea of having just the perfect curriculum or highly rated curriculum that will take care of all of our needs. That's not true, but I wish it was. Yes.
Anyone else? Yeah.
We talked about the one that said there's no need. Oh, wait, no, this is impossible to do everything, so I can just pick and choose what I want to do. So even the districts that have good curricular resources, they pick and choose what they want to do, and oftentimes we see that doesn't align with the essentials.
Absolutely. Yeah, we had this. I almost see this as a phase of curriculum adoption. Like the first couple of years, it's overwhelming. Everybody's just doing a few things, and then ultimately, hopefully, you can get past that. Get past that. But yeah, that's something I have seen as well. Like, well, this is a lot. We're gonna do. Anybody else? Or do you want to share out, Teddy, do you want to share out the responses, any responses from the chat? Yeah.
Kylie says, our trap that implementing a highly rated curriculum is going to reach all of our students and solve our issues. Jolynn says the thinking trap I see the most is confusing curricular resources with curriculum.
I really like, we spent all this money. We are not going to make any changes. Like, I think that's a feeling that happens sometimes at the end of this long curriculum adoption process. Should we keep going? Okay. Okay. All right, so we're going to start by providing a framework for curricular adoption. This is another Sharon Walpole resource. I'm sorry, but she has happened to write very well about all the things I care about. And so there's a lot of Sharon Walpole in my discussion, in my talks today. But she wrote an article for the reading teacher, specifically about the intersection of curriculum and coaching. So seems like a good article for us. This guided our work last year. We returned to it several times. We aren't going to have time to dig into the whole article or read the whole article today, but you can follow this QR code and just pull, if you're able to pull it up, look at the first few, just skim the first couple of sections. So the very intro section and a cautionary tale. All right, I know you didn't have a chance to read the whole article, but you get the flavor, right? If you keep scrolling down, you'll see that there is a schematic that's really helpful and also a list of enabling conditions that can be a really helpful resource as you're thinking about your curricular problems and working with your district. We wanted to highlight this connection to the core commitments. Annie had talked about the shift to really focusing on equity and how that needs to be part of this work. And Sharon's article really nicely echoes that when it says, "You in the mix for me. Effective professional learning must include direct attention to equity, positioning race and racism within a coach's adaptive work, along with addressing other beliefs and attitudes about teaching and learning will be worth the initial discomfort." So thinking about how not just this taps into several of the thinking traps, right? That there's if we just pick this one highly rated curriculum, like we're done. It's going to be great. In fact, a highly rated curriculum is highly rated in the aggregate, right? In basically how well it aligns to standards and how well it aligns to research. It's not highly rated for the kids in your district or your particular room. You have to make adjustments. You have to make sure you're adapting and adjusting the needs of the people that you serve. So in this article, she presents this framework, and she starts by talking about lessons from reading first. That I think this is fading a little bit the further away we get from it, but when I first started to work with teachers, there was this like reading first hangover almost, where they were like, no, we already did all that phonics. No, we already adopted this and did it with fidelity. We did that all during reading first, and none of it mattered, right? She also talks about positive models for curriculum and coaching, attention to equity, defining and choosing high-quality materials, and then the theory of change and enabling conditions. So from reading first, she says that she found that the funding and the focus of reading first was not a failure. Sometimes reading first is described as a failure or something that was well-intentioned but didn't work out, but that there was the use of specific curricular and intervention materials did increase. More professional learning happened for teachers, more school-based coaches were hired and used, and more time was spent on reading instruction. However, it didn't go far enough to impact the big things that we care about, which is the quality of the instruction and student reading achievement. And the lessons that she suggests we take from this is that it's not enough to do all these parts disparately, that teacher knowledge, curriculum, and coaching support all have to work together to support the uptake of particular curricula, that it's not enough to just have it, and it's not enough to just mandate it, that we have to have all of these systems working in concert. And she talks about all the different roles that a coach might play in the curricular landscape, and these are also things that have been demonstrated in the research. Coaches are involved in choosing and developing curricular resources, developing frameworks for implementation, supporting teacher flexibility and adaptation for student population and local conditions, curriculum training and professional development, co-planning, co-teaching, modeling, observing lessons, analyzing and interpreting student data, and implementing intervention or teaching students even using the materials, depending on your job description. And so there's a lot of different places where you have a lot of different responsibilities that can fall on you as the coach. When she defines high quality instructional materials, she talks about alignment to research standards and equity, and curricular materials that support teachers in enacting evidence-based practices. And this is an important link. What I was discussing earlier, for example, for the 4th and 5th grade teachers, that there's this list of evidence-based practices, it's in a practice guide, go do it. Well, you can't go teach a practice guide, right? You need a link. You need something in front of you every day that helps you enact those evidence-based practices with the text that you're trying to teach. And that's what a good curricular resource can do. So there should be support for content, for the specific pedagogy and the specific pedagogy. So it should show you what to teach and how to teach it. So with that in mind, I thought I would provide, we thought we'd look at the landscape of what's actually going on in Michigan with curricular resources right now, so you can think about how what your district is doing fits in. EPIC, we presented on an older version of this report in our original pathway, but a new version of this report just came out from Michigan State's EPIC collaborative that's showing how the curricular landscape in Michigan has been shifting over the past 5 or 6 years. So basically curricular trends from 2019 to 2023. And I'm going to come back to these recommendations, but this is a long report that basically provides 3 recommendations. First, that schools need to provide access to research-based curriculum resources and use robust curriculum evaluation tools to select them or evaluate them. Promote consistency of curriculum resource selection from classroom to classroom within districts, while also valuing teacher professional judgment, right? Like it's a balancing act, right? You want everyone to use the same thing because you've picked it for a reason, but you don't want it to become another reading first, adopting with fidelity thing. And then to continue and expand curriculum and align professional development opportunities with a focus on coaching. So here are the materials that teachers in Michigan are using. This is the response to superintendents that say that they have recently changed their core curriculum. 17% said that they were changing their ELA curriculum, that they had changed it in the past few years, versus 81% who said no. The ones who did said that they were doing it because their previous curriculum was outdated, or to meet the standards of Read by Grade 3, or to accelerate learning for students who need additional support for the most part. Those are the top 3 options. Also, 74% said that they had adopted or changed curricular resources during the pandemic to support remote instruction. Compared to the last time we talked about this, so in 2023 compared to 2019, teachers are using, more teachers are using some sort of curricular resource, right? So there's a decrease in the number of teachers saying that they don't have one. So that's good. Positive, right? There's an increase in the number of teachers who only have one main curricular resource that they're using, and a slight decrease in the number of teachers who are using 2 or more resources. So that can be positive or negative, depending on what the main resource is, right? But the number of additional curriculum after their core ELA curriculum that they reported using has gone down, and for none, fewer teachers are using none, fewer teachers are using 1, and more teachers are using 2 or more. So more teachers have 1 core curriculum that they're using in their district, but also more teachers are supplementing. So is that good or bad? I don't know. Depends. For the most part, there were 44 different ELA curricular resources reported. 154 were defined as core ELA curriculum, and 120 were supplemental resources that could support writing instruction, and 170 were additional resources to support phonics and spelling instruction. That's all in one state, y'all, in our state. That's how many things are going on. So it's very hard to keep track. But overall, by the way, this was a slight decrease in the number of core curricula being used, and a slight increase in the number of phonics and spelling supplements being used. 88% of teachers use 1 of 10 curricula, the top 10. This is the top 10 listed here. And in an improvement from 2019, half of these are highly rated for meeting ELA standards. Last time it was only 3 of them. This is not because teachers are that many people are changing. It's because 2 of the previously unrated or not rated curriculum have been rated highly since. So this is a better alignment between highly rated curriculum and what teachers are doing. 1/3 of Michigan teachers are using the 5 highly rated curriculum. Yes. Yes, Fontes and Pinnell is still the winner, still at the top. Most teachers are using their district's resources. That's also 84.4%. That's an increase from the 2019. So in 2019, fewer teachers were actually using the thing that the district had given them. So what we're finding is there's a better alignment here. The average teacher uses 3 different resources. 1.5 ELA curriculum resources, like core curriculum resources, and 2 or more additional resources for writing or spelling supplement. Was that? Yeah. So overall, this shows a small shift, but a positive shift across all of these metrics. Basically, the story is that more districts are adopting new curriculum to better align with research or support their students. More teachers are using the thing that the district has adopted. Most of them are able most teachers are reporting having a core curriculum and using it, and supplementing when they need to for phonics, spelling, and writing. So on the whole, what we're seeing is and more teachers are using highly rated curriculum. Now the rating system isn't perfect, but on the whole, this is telling a positive story about curriculum adoption. 2 questions popped up in the chat that people in the room might have also. One was about whether Fontes and Pinnell in the EPIC report was referring to the whole program or just the LLI. LLI is supposed to be their intervention program. It's supposed to be for one-on-one or small group work. And so the EPIC report was trying to ask about core curriculum. But I understand that people use LLI in different ways. So I have definitely been in districts where they were using the LLI program as their core curriculum or whatever. But in theory, the EPIC report was trying to ask about core curriculum versus differentiated or tier 2 instruction. And then somebody else was asking me what was going to be on the approved list, if there was going to be an approved list. I don't have any inside information about that. And in general, I don't agree with having a mandated or approved list because it gets very political very fast in other states where I've seen this happen. And it's also often the list is too short to really accommodate the variety of needs in a particular state. I think Utah only has 3 curricula on their list. That's not enough. So I generally am hopeful that I generally counsel against having an approved list. And I understand that it creates a lot of uncertainty and difficulties. But I've never seen an approved list where I was like, that's exactly the list I would have made. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of room for disagreement. There's no perfect curriculum, and there's also no perfect list of curriculum. As I mentioned, the very first recommendation from the new EPIC report was that districts have access to rubrics to help them evaluate the curricular resources that they're either considering or have already adopted. I just want to point out that spending time analyzing things and applying rubrics to something you have already chosen is actually a really valuable thing. So one of the best things that came out of using a variety of tools to analyze curricula to choose one for East Lansing was that we went in knowing what the problems were, right? Because there is no perfect curriculum. Understanding just what might need to be supplemented or changed is a big advantage. So rubrics can be used to select, but they can also be used to analyze and then decide to supplement or change or adapt. There are 3 rubrics that we talked about last year that are all very useful in their own way, but quite different. One is Ed Reports. One is the Reading League Curriculum Evaluation Guidelines, and one is the IES rubric. So IES being the Institute of Educational Sciences that funds research and comes out with lots of great practice guides and that kind of thing. So the Ed Reports review criteria are about alignment to standards and research-based practices, and they look at implementation, support materials, and assessment. And they have both a K2 and a 3.8. They look at text quality and complexity, how to build knowledge with text, and usability. These are, I want to say that EdReports is probably the most widely used, and when we say something is highly rated, we usually mean it's highly rated in something like EdReports. It's very well respected. It's not perfect, and actually some of my favorite curricula have not been highly rated by EdReports. So it's really about how well aligned the curriculum is to standards, right? How easy it is for a district to use it, to like check off that they're meeting all of the state standards for literacy. The Reading League is very focused on, guess what? It's very focused on phonics and word recognition. There is stuff about language comprehension and reading, and then also handwriting, spelling, and comprehension. They're very interested in making sure that there is a very adherence to what we think of as the letter of the law in the science of reading. Like it's very particular around specific research things. For example, if you're teaching phonological awareness, you need to build in letters at some point, right? They're going to have, like, those kinds of recommendations are taken very seriously and very carefully laid out. The IES rubric is probably the most comprehensive. It's also the longest. It has sections for grades K2 and 3-5 that address foundational reading skills, reading comprehension, writing development, speaking and listening, language development, and skills. So very comprehensive. However, so I would say that EdReports is basically your first go-to, right? It's like your basic, like, top level, does this meet my standards? Is this going to be a highly rated curriculum? Is it likely to be included on approved lists? That kind of thing. Reading League is like, we're very worried about the science of reading. We want to we've been doing things this other way, and we need to swing the pendulum and make sure we're bringing in resources that are very well aligned, particularly around phonics and word recognition. IES is your most comprehensive. It has everything. It's the most detailed as far as research recommendations as you expect. This is probably the most difficult one to use, however, because it's quite long and labor intensive. All of these are linked. But we also want to think about equity, right? These are all about research. These are all about how well does this teach phonological awareness? How well does this teach phonemic awareness? There's also a rubric from NYU Steinhardt called the Culturally Relevant Education ELA Scorecard, and is designed to analyze whether or not your materials are culturally responsive to a wide variety of groups. And this looks at representation, social justice, and teachers' materials. So you can tally up the characters and authors of the books in the curriculum, highlight the diversity of the characters and the accuracy of their portrayals. So, for example, you don't get points for having a very stereotypical Native American or Indigenous character, right? Like that wouldn't count. So you get to see who's represented in your curriculum and how accurately they are portrayed. You also look at there's also a lens for looking at the stories that are being told and whether they highlight stories of decolonization, highlight narratives that interrogate power and privilege, whether multiple perspectives are represented across the curriculum, or whether there are opportunities to connect the lessons that are learned from the different reading materials to real life and action. And then finally, do the teachers' materials provide teachers with guidance on how to approach, enhance, and customize lessons for their particular student populations? So you can see how layering this on top of one of those researchy, rubrics can be really helpful in seeing a curriculum from two different lenses. And in fact, this is what we did during our curriculum evaluation process. We had a research-aligned rubric, and then we had an equity rubric. They weren't exactly these, but they were derived from versions of these. And so for each category, you can score these things. So we want to make sure that when we're looking at curriculum, we're thinking about the whole picture. And there's an article in which this rubric was used to score some of the most highly sold, the most sold curriculum, and they didn't score that high on the. So like curricula that are being frequently used across the country and may be highly rated for research can sometimes not be highly rated in other areas. And we found that this was a problem. This was we spent a whole day, basically, in our previous pathway just talking about the cultural relevance and equity problems people have found with their different curriculum. So we're going to dive into what you do. We're going to do some examples and talk about what you do when you use those rubrics and find the problems, right? Because every curriculum is going to have some sort of problem. And we basically decided that there were three main areas of misalignment. You could have a curricular resource that is misaligned with research evidence, with the literacy, or if it's a math, or math essentials. But you can also have something that's well aligned with research, but misaligned with an equity focus. Like I said, there were several curricula that were evaluated and found to be wanting in that area. But also there's a misalignment with local instructional culture and teachers' preferences and beliefs. And that's something you have to kind of make your own rubric for based on what you know about your teachers and your district and the history there. But not appreciating all three, not attending to all three will cause trouble during the implementation phase. So we're going to share some of our own experiences and thinking about how we've worked around some of these problems, and then give you guys time to talk about your own problems. But we just want to make sure we are going to talk about real resources that we've used. We're going to not be entirely positive, but we're not pro or con any of these resources. It's just, there's no perfect resource, and we're going to have to adapt no matter what we adopt. So I'm going to let Annie go first.
Thanks. Okay, so I realized that we dove right into this. Before I do this, was there anything about the rubrics that anyone had questions about? Because I know we are trying to make sure that we give you more time at the end for some breakouts and some table talk, but are there any questions about that before I share this example with you? Because you're so thorough, that's why.
You can dive into them and we can address questions like that during your breakout.
Yes, so Laura's saying, feel free, we can address them during the breakout too. So what I'm going to share with you is from an experience I had as a coach when I was a early literacy coach at Core ISD. And so it's been a while since I did this. And so there is a new Wonders. There's an updated Wonders since that time. So if you think about this in terms of, now I have not had a chance to work with the new Wonders, but the reason in sharing this is to help you think about the process, not necessarily about the content, if that makes sense. So one of the things that the school that I was working with, the coach had said, Alicia Thompson had said, Annie, can you come and help me? We really need support with writing instruction. And, our teachers are kind of not sure where to go. We just got Wonders. They had just adopted this. Now, as a literacy coach, I can tell you that was hard for me, and maybe you've had this experience, is that people would say, we knew you were so busy, so we didn't want to make you have to come to the curriculum meetings. So they would have all the meetings and adopt a curriculum, and then would realize there were problems with it and be like, could you come in and help coach and help us figure out what's not aligned, So I lived through that in several districts because I supported 8 different districts by myself it was not an ideal setting. But anyhow, but there were wonderful people, all with good intention. And so we did lunch and learns as a group, and we did it across grade levels. And so what I said to Alicia was, Alicia, there was this Literacy Today article. Now, Literacy Today, you all get free because of our ILA membership. And I love that they have very accessible, quick articles. This was a 2-pager by Dr. Steve Graham, who is the guru on writing research, right? So I thought, who better to ask than Steve Graham? So it was just 2 pages back and forth. You have a link to this in your resources, so you can get to this article very quickly. He highlights things that he would say, this is what we should be doing in writing instruction. And so what I said to Alicia is, what do you think about having everyone read this article? And then we can put it against the essentials and show how it's aligned, right? So the things that he put for the writing dues on the far right, I just put, well, here's where that lives in the essentials. So again, know that this was done prior to the updated essentials, but none of that would really change too much. And then this was the interesting part. Teachers I wanted them to self-reflect. How do you find your curriculum at your grade level? So we made 5 copies of this, grades 1 through 5. And every teacher had to rate how well they felt each part was aligned with Wonders. So they each went through. You want to encourage students to write for multiple purposes. So each teacher would think about their grade level and rate it a green, yellow, or red across that grade level. And then they would do the same for the other 3 parts. So what was interesting is that not everybody was I mean, you might be shocked by this, but if you are, just so you know too, there's a link to both the article and the template in the slide deck when you get it. So feel free to use and amend as you want. So, I mean, this is an example of kindergarten, right? Nobody was in the green, so that was kind of like, okay, we all feel like there's something we need to do more. Then we had a few people in yellow, and then we had people like far red. So at the very least, this caused us to be able to have some really good conversations, and discourse is good. Like I always feel like, you can do it in a room and just have a conversation. It's not personal, but we're taking into account what people are. This goes back to what Dr. Duke said, right? Find out what teachers are thinking about it. I could go in, I went through it, and I thought, holy man, like, oh, okay. But I thought, like, don't be judgy. Go in, see how it's going, and try and find out how teachers feel about it. So the K teachers were pretty much like, no, we need to do work. Then we got to grade 1. Lots of there's like, oh, yeah, this is doing great. And then there were some, like, big red ones, right? So again, this is all shared out for you, and I took out a bunch of the slides just for time's sake, but this process is what I wanted you to think about more about, not necessarily this exact activity, but how could you utilize something that's like a short, like, common article, kind of like today we're using Dr. Walpole's article, right? Something that's short, that's teacher-friendly, but yet also research, and then helping them think about applying that to their work. And then I was able to bring in the essentials. You could just do this with the essentials, but you would pick a particular part. So for example, if you're thinking about your curriculum and you hone in on what is the phonics, like what's explicit instruction, letter, names, and sounds, okay, we're gonna look at essential 5 and layer that over this part of the curriculum. But then the other trick is, how many phonics curriculums do you have? Like I've been in schools where they have like 3 phonics curriculums. We're doing like 60 minutes a day of phonics. And I'm thinking, why are we doing all that? Like when are we actually reading words and making meaning, right? So that's the other piece that I would help you think about. And if you want it, is I did make like a analysis tool where it was like, how many different curriculums do you have that are all teaching the same thing? And how many times are you doing that in a day? Because sometimes it's just overkill. So just want to invite you to think about how you might use a process like this, where you can take either an article or the essentials, and by grade level, allow people to have individual time to reflect and then collective time to reflect, so that you can start to move toward that next step, which we had conversations that were like, yeah, we need to do this. So I will also let you know, side note, as a coach, going into one district representing the ISD, you do not want to be. I went and asked the superintendent for permission because I said, you just spent a whole lot of money on this set of resources, and it is not aligned to research in like 90% of the ways with writing. Are you okay with me doing this with everybody? It's okay. Like, I'm not okay not saying that, so I just won't participate, but I need to let you know that I have to do this. Like I can't just, and she said, no, if it's not best for kids, we want to do it. So also just that little tip that I did go to the person that was at the school board that bought the stuff, that we had to then go back to the board and say, this is misaligned and we need to do supplementing, even though we just spent all this money. So like, it's tough conversations, but if you go back to little kids and think about children at the center of the conversation, it ended up going okay. So just a little story. So if you want to turn and talk about what kinds of analysis activities you've done, how a tool like this might support you, and what it could look like.
As I said, teased earlier, I was part of a curriculum adoption process for my children's district, and we chose a curriculum based primarily on the research. And my understanding of the research, this is is part of a table we created as part of our review process. So we were definitely analyzing whether or not the curriculum aligned with the essentials and the research about how to teach each thing, but we also looked at actual studies that had been done on that curriculum. You would be shocked how few curricula have ever been tested in any sort of study, rigorous study design. This doesn't seem like There were 4 bookworm studies compared to 2 for the other curriculum. These are 2 very popular curricula, and so 4 was like the winning number, right? There isn't that. So even if a curriculum is research based, it may not be researched, and we talked a lot about the difference between those 2 things. But really, we ended up choosing bookworms primarily because of the stronger research base and the stronger alignment to what we understood as reading research, but it wasn't perfect. There was a lot of high quality reading opportunities. The Bookworms curriculum is an open source, open access curriculum, so it's free. You can pay to have materials printed for you, but the curriculum itself is free, and all you have to do is buy the books. So Sharon's philosophy is districts should spend their money on books, not on curricular materials. So it was a full curriculum. It covered everything we wanted. It was highly aligned with research. There was high quality reading experiences. Great, right? But it's older, right? To get a curriculum that's been this well developed and tested, it's been around for a while. There were books in there this is not a problematic book, but Morse the Moose, right? I learned to read Morse the Moose, and it's in the Bookworms curriculum, right? So some of them were older and not diverse, and some of them were even considered problematic by our district. We went through and looked at the books, and we're like, well, some of these we're not going to want to teach for various reasons. And so those were 2 problems that we had right away. We did do a similar review of the other curriculum, and it had similar book problems, so this ended up not being the decisive factor, but it could have been if the other curriculum had been like definitively better, right? But also, there was a lot of new practices that needed to happen that contradicted prior practices, and one of the issues with an open source curriculum is that there isn't as much salesmanship, and there isn't as much training. Like that sort of stuff is not as high quality sometimes because it's a free curriculum, right? And so there was some problem. The selling the teachers on the new practices was something that was falling to the coaches in the district. So here's what happened. In the Bookworms, for the equity and diversity of text problem, the lesson plan structure is very repetitive in Bookworms. There's a lot of routines that students and teachers use again and again from their lessons, and so we just subbed out titles. Specific teachers and coaches were hired over the summer to write replacement lessons and use other books that we wanted to teach. And that's totally doable with Bookworms. I bet it's doable with lots of curricula. It's the skills and the strategies that you're trying to teach, not necessarily the particular books. So there was definitely some money invested in this, but they did it right off the bat during curriculum adoption, so teachers didn't have to get used to using one book and then switch. And this made a big difference in uptake of the curriculum. And whenever possible, we would take authors that were already in the Bookworms curriculum, like there was a Grace Lynn book, and add another Grace Lynn book, right, to sort of deepen our connection with some of the more diverse and newer authors that were already featured in the curriculum. So that was one solution. The next was they're just kind of watching and helping teachers, particularly kindergarten teachers, adopt these new practices and notice where those things were not being uptaken, right? Kindergarten, so at one point, one of the literacy coaches came to me and she was like, the kindergarten teachers have gone rogue. They're getting out the level texts again. They're getting out their the high frequency word cards again. They're doing their own thing. And I was like, okay, we'll have a talk. So we had to really design professional learning around these specific topics that were uncomfortable for them and were a big switch. And basically what it came down to is it takes time to see the change. It takes several years of doing a curriculum to notice that your kindergartners are better off at the end of the year than they used to be before. It takes a while to get on board with the practices and try it. But my son's kindergarten teacher this year, who was there when we started this process 5 years ago, has said that she would never go back now. Like, she completely appreciates this approach. She was skeptical at first, she admits it, and now she's like, it's working. I understand now. It just took me a while to get there. So it does take a while to see that change. So after you've adopted something, you have to identify these areas of misalignment, identify the supports teachers will need to bridge those gaps, and embed those supports in curriculum training, implementation, and ongoing coaching support. So So if we so I'm going to encourage you to go back to our enabling conditions and this theory of change in Sharon's article to look for places where you can intervene in the systems, to look for places where you can supplement, where you can train or hire teachers to adapt, where you can schedule time for other materials and activities, or work as a team to find and create resources, and collaborate and work on our school level norms to adapt different to find the goals, to agree on goals and create and test solutions.
A quick summary around if you want to pilot things that Laura was saying she didn't know about, any specific research that said you have to pilot or not, but it helped with teacher buy-in and then also with ease of implementation. So just a tip on that. And then we'll just give all of you our contact information. And hopefully this will be at least a start. We figured it was like 10 plus hours of content that we hope to put in an hour and a half. So any feedback you can give us, because we are going to be doing this pathway again. So if something was particularly helpful or clunky or not helpful, like that would be good for us to know too. So thank you all for being here. And we'd love to see how it works out and what you're thinking about learning about.